Before we get started, I want to give you a little brief background on this issue and then introduce some folks. Rio Grande Foundation last year at our Milton Friedman Day event brought what is called the Florida model of education reform to New Mexico. And that was with Dr. Matthew Ladner. And much like Lance, I sent him on a suicide mission around the state, driving hither and yon. Lance and I drove down to Roswell and back yesterday, a nice gentle stroll. Matt Ladner of Goldwater Institute did much the same thing when we went to Las Cruces and back last year. So anyway, virtual schooling is an integral part of what was done in Florida, and I'm really, we've worked with the administration, and I'm very optimistic that virtual schooling will be a part of the future reforms promoted by the Martinez administration. So that's why we're here today with Lance. But a few folks that are here in the crowd, and I welcome you all, but I'd like to have you stand and be recognized. Representative Nate Gentry is here. Former representative and current candidate for Congress, Janice Arnold Jones. And we have board members. I'll let you all stand at once. Vic Bruno, Elizabeth Keene, Peter Howley, and Doug Turner. And Jeff Van Dyke is also a big supporter of our organization. Thank you, Jeff. Now, I'm not going to directly introduce Lance. I'm going to, we're going to see how technology works in action, because I didn't get Hannah's biography until this morning after we were already on with Bob Clark, so I'm working the old BlackBerry on her bio. But Hannah Scandera is the Secretary of Education in New Mexico. She was hailed by Governor Martinez upon her being named to that position as a proven reformer, and her being named in that position shows that the Martinez administration is serious about education reform and making New Mexico no longer 49th in education. That's my editorial, but not straight off the bio. Previously, Scandera served as Deputy Commissioner of Education under Florida Governor Jeb Bush. During his administration, she advanced middle and high school reforms that instituted greater accountability and incentives for high performance and the end of social promotion, which unfortunately failed here in New Mexico in the last session, but I know they're going to keep working on that. And as a result of reforms pursued in Florida, especially if you were here and saw Matt Ladner's presentation, you know that Florida has experienced tremendous growth and improvement in their reading scores among their students. And so while we're catching up to Florida 1.0, current Governor Rick Scott is promoting Florida 2.0, which includes universal vouchers. So that is a long way from where we are politically in New Mexico. But I think that we're going to get some serious reform here, and we have the right people in charge. And so I'm very pleased that Hannah's here to introduce Lance Izumi.
It is a treat to be here, and particularly on Milton Friedman's birthday. Somewhere in my past life, I spent about 4 years at the Hoover Institution at Stanford University, and at that time, Milton Friedman and Rose Friedman were there as fellows as well, and I will tell you, they were unbelievable advocates for education. And so obviously, not an accident that we're here today talking about education. I also will say that, just a quick plug, New Mexico is coming, and Florida better watch out. In 1995, New Mexico's 4th grade reading scores were ahead of Florida's. Today, Florida has Hispanic students alone are ahead of 31 other states' total population of students when it comes to 4th grade reading. So it's possible, doable, and we are certainly committed closing that gap. And ultimately, in my dream, and I think in many New Mexicans' dreams, we will get there, and I hope surpass folks like Florida. So put that marker in the sand, we'll see how quickly we can do that. But it is truly my pleasure to introduce Dr. Lance Izumi. We actually had the privilege to meet when I was the Undersecretary for Education in California under Governor Schwarzenegger, and not just meet, but work together on different initiatives. And I'm struck by, and I've said this here in New Mexico, reform and a commitment to reform, it doesn't happen overnight, and it is, in many cases, requires a great deal of perseverance. And I believe that Dr. Izumi demonstrates perseverance, particularly because he's still in California fighting for it. But I also believe that he consistently has put out another marker in the sand for education reform. And today I am very excited to hear about his report regarding virtual learning here in the state of New Mexico. Governor Martinez is wholeheartedly committed to effective options for our students, whether that be charter, virtual, tax credits. I know Education New Mexico is here, and we are firm believers that tax credits are a very important part of options for parents and for students. And so I would just say that a huge thank you to Dr. Izumi for his commitment, for his investment here in New Mexico in this report. And my hope is that we have you back and we can say we implemented what you recommended. So Dr. Izumi, as I should give, he's got an unbelievable resume. He is the Senior Director of Education Studies at the Pacific Research Institute for Public Policy in California. And most recently and notably has co-authored the groundbreaking book, Not As Good As You Think, Why the Middle Class Needs School Choice. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Izumi here to the great state of New Mexico.
Short as me, you also have to put the microphone down. I want to thank Hannah Scandera for that very kind and generous introduction. I was telling her earlier today that when I heard that Governor Martinez had selected her as the Secretary of Education of New Mexico, I was extremely pleased, but I was also a little jealous too. Secretary Scandera had done a wonderful job in California. As mentioned, most notably as Undersecretary of Education in California. And I have to say that given the simply awful decisions by the current administration in California, Hannah, I wish you were back. However, California's loss is certainly New Mexico's gain, and I'm glad that you're going to be doing for the people of New Mexico what we hope one day will be done for the people of California as well. So thank you so much for that introduction. I want to also thank the Rio Grande Foundation and Paul Gessing in particular for inviting me to come out here to your great state. The Rio Grande Foundation, as all of you know, is one of the engines of producing sound, innovative policy ideas, not just here in New Mexico, but all around the country. And I want to congratulate Paul and his team here at the foundation for their important work aimed at increasing the freedom and liberty for all New Mexicans. Now, speaking of freedom and liberty, it is an extra pleasure for me to be here on this occasion of honoring the 99th birthday of Dr. Milton Friedman. I had the honor and pleasure to have met Dr. Friedman a number of times. I remember reading his classic book, Capitalism and Freedom, when I was in high school. And it was one of the books that helped me formulate my core views and beliefs. I also admired Milton Friedman's dedication to freedom for everyone. At a school choice conference in Mexico a number of years ago, which I attended, Dr. Friedman urged, as he had done throughout his entire life, that all parents, not just parents from a certain background, from a certain income level, be given the opportunity and the tools to choose the school that best fit the needs of their child, their children. And it was that message that served as an impetus for me to do my own research on the performance or lack of performance of schools in middle-class and affluent neighborhoods, which Secretary Scandera referred to. And so if it wasn't for Milton Friedman there, I wouldn't have done that work. And I thank him, wherever he is, and I know he's up there. I want to thank Milton Friedman for all his inspiration to me in particular. But aside from public policy, I also wanted to, give you an idea of what Milton Friedman was like as a person. I remember in my early years working for the Pacific Research Institute, my boss, Sally Pipes, actually asked me to go and pick up Milton Friedman and his wife Rose and drive them down the San Francisco Bay Area Peninsula to a school choice event. And I was very nervous because, here's Milton Friedman, who's my hero throughout my entire life. Now I get to be his driver and take him on this trip down, and we're going to be talking about school choice, which I purportedly know something about, but he's the guru of gurus about it. And so what am I going to say to him? So I pick him up at his apartment, him and his wife Rose, and we start driving down the freeway. And I'm kind of stammering, talking about what the latest developments in school choice research are, and that's not what they wanted to talk about. They were just very human, very real people. Milton Friedman was a polite, courteous, gracious individual, as was his wife Rose, who, as you know, was also a great economist in her own right. And in that drive down, what struck me was that we spent more time talking about, and Rose spent more time talking about Milton's driving abilities or lack thereof than monetary policy or school choice. So, they really put you at ease. You never felt that there was this gulf between you and this Nobel Prize winner. And yet here he was, such an influential man, one of the most influential people in the last century. I mean, we wouldn't have seen all the changes in this world actually without Milton Friedman. The Berlin Wall coming down, the increase in market economies throughout the world. That can be traced back to the work that Milton Friedman did in his life. So, even though he's gone, I really do think that we're all Milton Friedman's children, and that through us, his ideas, his vision, his energy, and his devotion to freedom really do live on. And an event like this, is not only a tribute to him, but a continuation of what he had tried to strive for throughout his entire life. So I want to thank you, all of you, for coming here to today's event to honor him and his ideas. I'm here to chat with you about a study entitled Enchanted Future, the Promise of Virtual Education in New Mexico, that my colleague Dr. Vicki Murray and I did for the Rio Grande Foundation. And you might wonder at first, how does online education actually fit into this theme of school choice that Milton Friedman talked about his whole life and championed? Well, it does really, if you do think about it for a little while, because it gives parents who might be dissatisfied with the education their children are receiving in their regular bricks and mortar traditional public school classroom another choice. Because of the improvements of technology, students can take courses over the internet or through the use of interactive software, where in the past they were stuck in their pre-assigned class in that bricks and mortar classroom. So let me give you some background information. I'm glad that you were able to see our video, our short film here, and I hope you enjoyed it. And we're going to, you're the first folks who have seen this, and we're going to, take this around the country. But let me give you some information to, put this whole issue and topic in some context. Today in America, there are more than 2 million students out of the total of 50 million public school students in the country who are currently attending a virtual school for all their classes or taking at least one course through the internet. Now that figure is astonishing considering the fact that this whole idea of virtual education really started only in 1996 with the establishment of the Florida Virtual School and the Kentucky Virtual School. Yet during the intervening time up till today, online education has really increased. From about 40 or 50,000 students in 2000, it jumped to 500,000 students by 2005. Online enrollment then doubled as of 2007 with more than 1 million students. And online learning's 30% annual enrollment growth is unprecedented, and experts actually believe that roughly 1 out of every 5 public school students, or about 10 million, will actually be enrolled in an online course of some kind by the year 2014. Now, Harvard Professor Clayton Christensen and Michael Horn, who's the executive director of the Insight Institute, wrote a very influential book that some of you may have heard about how disruptive innovation will change the way the world learns. And they predict that this online learning revolution will actually result in, by 2019, half of all high school classes being taught online. So, I know, before I go further to look at the findings of our study, I know that for a lot of you, this issue of online learning is new. You haven't really talked about it. It's not the kind of thing that has, been out there, at least like school choice has, for years and years, so we all basically know what it means. So I want to give you a few definitions so that you kind of understand what we're talking about here. Online education is instruction between an instructor and the student via the internet. Now, this can take place either in a traditional bricks and mortar classroom or in a distance learning model. Now, there are also hybrid or blended learning schools, which will divide the learning days so that part of the kids' learning takes place in that traditional bricks and mortar classroom, but part of the day part of the learning takes place in a computer laboratory, like you saw in this film with the rocket ship charter school. About a quarter of their day takes place in this computer learning lab, and they use interactive software that, again, does not need the actual supervision of certificated teachers. Now, distance education, as opposed to online education, distance education consists of online courses and more traditional correspondence programs. So in distance education, whether it's online or correspondence, the teacher and the student are not in the same location. Now, virtual schools usually provide students with, virtual schools are actually both online and remote. That is that they offer a formal instruction through an internet website in which most of the instruction actually occurs while the teacher and the learner are in separate geographic locations, right? Instead of in a traditional bricks and mortar classroom, and it occurs over the internet. So students can earn credits towards their grade level advancement, graduation, or both, and private vendors are selected by the virtual school and typically provide what's called the learning management systems, which is the software that creates the website delivery portal, which is more jargon, through which syllabi, course materials, assignments, homework, teacher feedback all can go through. So virtual schools usually provide the students with both the computers and any additional instructional materials they need. So it's not as if, okay, you're in a virtual charter school, for example, in California, well, you don't have a lot of money, where you can come up with all the thousands of dollars to pay for computers, and other kinds of hardware and materials. These schools, charter schools, will provide that for you. So now students in these virtual schools typically work at their own pace, and they meet with their fellow students and their teachers online. And actually though, and this is an important point, is that many of these virtual schools also include opportunities for face-to-face direct socialization amongst the students who are taking these courses. I think a lot of worry amongst parents is the fact that they think that, well, my kid may learn better through an online course, but they won't have any socialization opportunities. They'll be this isolated wonk without any social skills. And yet, actually, if you look at these virtual charter schools in California and other places, they offer kids the opportunity to join clubs, sports activities, to go on field trips, band, all these kinds of things that you would think were available only in a regular class, traditional bricks and mortar school, are actually available in many of these virtual schools as well. So, and also too, teachers are also available not only through online, but often will make regular visits to the child as well. Greg Van Urich, who's a vice president over at the Fordham Foundation, actually has a really good way of thinking about this whole concept of virtual education. And he says that, he asks all of us to simply think of virtual schools as simply of a regular school, but you remove the building, you swap in a computer instead, and the internet connection actually becomes the bus transporting the students to the school. As with other schools, most virtual schools have an office, administrators, teachers, professional development, curriculum, attendance, grades, report cards, parents' conferences, and special education services. However, there are important differences between the schools comprised of electrons and those fashioned by bricks. And these include greater dependence on technology, different kinds of socialization, although there are similarities, there are different kinds of socialization. There are no snow days, and a whole list of other differences as well. But he makes his best observation, though, in differentiating between a regular bricks and mortar school and a virtual school is to think about the whole concept of learning. Now, in a traditional classroom, what you have is time and learning, right? Time is fixed and learning is variable. So you're in a math class, algebra, let's say, and you are there for 1 hour. Now, the child, the student, may understand the material, may not get it, may actually be bored because they got it 2 weeks ago. So that learning is variable in that 1 hour. Now, in an online classroom, however, you have learning that's variable. I'll make sure that I get this right. Learning is fixed and time is variable. Because if a student needs 2 hours, 3 hours to learn the material, they have that opportunity in an online setting. The important thing is that they master the material. So if it takes them 20 minutes or 2 hours, the time really doesn't matter as long as they master the material. Whereas there's no guarantee in a regular traditional classroom that a child really does master that material in that 1 hour, for example, that they're in that algebra class, that English course, that biology course, whatever it is. Now, how about New Mexico then? How does New Mexico fit into this whole model of online learning? Now, New Mexico does have a statewide online education program, and it's called the Innovative Digital Education and Learning New Mexico, and the acronym is called IDEAL-M. And it was it's actually an award-winning program. The Council for State Governments West Innovation Award winner for 2009. And in that year, there were only 8 winners selected nationwide, and this program here in New Mexico was one of them. This program here in New Mexico is really interesting because it's actually quite different than a lot of the other state virtual programs that have been established, because it incorporates learning opportunities at all levels, not just at the K-12 level, but at K-12, in colleges, and in other areas, so that you have this kind of seamless ability here in New Mexico to offer these types of online courses across segment lines. I know that back in California, I served on the Board of Governors of the California Community College System, appointed by Governor Schwarzenegger, like Secretary Scandera, and one of the things we always complain about is the lack of seamlessness between the different segments of K-12 and higher education. At least this program here has that seamless quality to it. Now, state virtual schools in other states are becoming increasingly popular, and they now exist in 39 other states, and more than 450,000 course enrollments go through these different programs. Now, here in New Mexico, the number of enrollments has increased actually quite a lot percentage-wise, over the last year or so. So in 2008-09 to 2009-10, those two different fiscal years, the number of students here in the New Mexico program increased from about 1,500 students to 2,100 students, which is quite an increase actually. And New Mexico, and also significantly, New Mexico is the first state to create this statewide virtual program that encompasses, as I said, all aspects of both traditional public and higher education, but also teacher professional development, continuing education, and workforce education. So there are many good things to recommend this program here in New Mexico. And there are, besides this statewide program, there are other programs here in New Mexico, in individual school districts such as in Albuquerque, Rio Rancho, Hobbs, Taos, Roy, and a number of other districts actually have their own virtual or online programs. Now, while New Mexico has made great strides in this area, much more than in some other states. I actually gave a speech recently in Nebraska where they have absolutely no online or virtual component in their education system. And so it was actually very easy to talk to them about what they needed to do, because when you have nothing, everything is possible. But here in New Mexico, though, we do have this system, Ideal New Mexico. And some people I think will point to it and say, well, that's enough. We don't have to do more. But there are things that should be contemplated beyond just the good things that this program does. And one of the things that people here in New Mexico should consider is that fact that first of all, a lot of the online innovation that's been taking place in this country has gone through not the regular public school systems, but through charter schools. And so in my own home state of California, there are over 30 virtual charter schools where all of the education takes place in the home of the child. But here in New Mexico, and we have 1,000 charter schools in the entire state, and we have no cap on the number of charter schools in California. Fortunately, there are a number of states around the country that do have caps upon the creation of new charter schools, and New Mexico is one of them that does have a cap. So over a 5-year period, only 75 startup charter schools can be implemented, and 25 conversion charter schools. So a total of 100 over a 5-year period. And what the unfortunate thing about that is that it is a disincentive for schools that want to employ online technology, which are becoming a much larger and larger part of the market, to locate in a state where you have caps, and they might run up against those caps in the future if they want to expand. Now, I know most of you know what a charter school is, but I mean, for those of you who don't, I mean, a charter school is a school that is basically a deregulated public school that does not have to adhere to a lot of the rules and regulations that traditional public schools have to adhere to. But in exchange, they have to meet certain performance benchmarks. And if they don't, within a certain period of time, their charter is revoked and they cease to exist. Unlike most public schools, which can go on and on, performing very poorly, and nothing ever happens to them. So now, it's because of this, the cap and some other issues that actually New Mexico received a C grade, luckily not an F grade, by the Center for Education Reform when it came to grading the state charter school laws around the country. And I think that's one of the things, because of this, charter schools are the innovators, really, when it comes to the use of online technology, as we saw in the film. Those were all charter schools, most of the charter schools we're talking about, that you need to remove those types of restrictions from them. Now, I mentioned the issue of virtual charter schools, and the virtual charter schools are schools where all the learning takes place in the home. The problem here for New Mexico is that there's a distance learning regulation here in New Mexico that seems to prevent the establishment of full-time, multi-district virtual schools in New Mexico. As I said, in California we have over 30 of these full-time virtual charter schools. It appears as though, based upon the language of the law, that under the distance learning regulation, that would be very difficult to establish here in New Mexico unless there is some change in the wording of that regulation. And I think that's one of the things that that should be looked at. And let me just read you the rule itself so you understand exactly what some of these innovators who want to start these types of schools here in New Mexico would face if they try to do so. The law actually says distance learning technologies may occasionally be used as full-time educational programming for students in unusual circumstances. However, distance learning shall not be used as a substitute for all direct face-to-face student and teacher interactions unless approved by the local Board of Education. So what does that tell you? Is that decision about whether to establish those types of schools are up to the local Board of Education, and that if the board is hostile to the establishment of those types of schools and the employment of those types of learning models, then you're going to have obviously a barrier for those schools and for students who want to make use of those schools. And so I think that what New Mexicans need to do is look at regulations like that limit the type of schools that use this online technology. New Mexico has already said that they think that this is a good type of technology and that it has promise in raising the performance of students here in the state, but it should be allowed to all types of parties who want to make use of it in the most innovative way, and leave it up to the students and their parents to decide which one of those delivery systems is going to best meet their needs, and so that they are not just forced to go to the local public school to get that online learning course that they might think is best for their child. So that's what online education is. Now, one of the key reasons that we want to have wider use of online education is not just that it meets the needs of, it might meet the needs of students better, it's because if it does, it'll improve their performance as well. The software programs used in online education adapt to the individual student and increase the level of difficulty or the amount of remediation they need based upon the responses that students end up getting that the students input into the system, and they end up getting much more individualized instruction than they would if they were in a regular classroom. Students are able to access their online teachers at nearly any time of the day, nearly 7 days a week, with their questions. And as soon as a student masters the material, they can either move on rather than to limp along at the common denominator case of a regular bricks and mortar classroom. Now, these advantages result in better student achievement. A recent analysis sponsored by the U.S. Department of Education that looked at more than 1,000 studies at both the higher education and K-12 level found that the average online student performed at a higher level than students in the regular bricks and mortar traditional classroom. So online education holds promise for New Mexico, which, as was mentioned earlier today, has an issue with its ranking amongst the states when it comes to student performance. And I am not one to point fingers because, we in California, selfishly might say, thank goodness for New Mexico because it keeps us company. Because, we're always usually together, as Secretary Scandera would recall from her days in California, right near the bottom as well. And so when you look at the potential that this technology has to improve student performance, then I think that you have to take a real serious look also and make it widely available to as many students as possible, not just restricting it to a comfortable delivery system that suits the needs and interests of the adults in the system. One of the other things that we talk about in the study is, in terms of recommendations, is how are we going to get the best teachers to staff these online courses? Now, in most states, unfortunately, online teachers, just like regular classroom teachers, have to have an in-state teacher license, right? But does that make really any sense for an online course, right? If you have a teacher who's a star teacher in Colorado, now why shouldn't that teacher be able to teach an online course to students here in Las Cruces or Roswell or Albuquerque, wherever, right? Because if your child is stuck in a classroom where you have a teacher who is not doing well, wouldn't you rather have a teacher who can teach your child through an online course, even if that person is physically residing in another state? Well, unfortunately, that's not the view of most states. Most states do not allow this teacher reciprocity in terms of licensure. The only state that really recognizes the out-of-state licenses of online teachers is Oklahoma. And a few other states are moving in that direction, but I think that the state legislatures around the country have been very slow in reacting to the potential of this system. I mentioned that in California, if you're a student in one county, and the charter school, the virtual charter school, is actually chartered in a county not contiguous to where you live. You can't go to it as if the internet stopped at the county line. Well, these teacher licensure laws, seem to say that the internet stops at the state line. So, we need to look at, what is available through the technology, who is going to be able to give the best instruction to our students, regardless of where they live, and, regardless of how they deliver that instruction. And the more autonomy that virtual schools have over their day-to-day operations, including staffing, the more likely they're able to hire talented teachers, whether they're out of state or at times even out of country. And this will ensure, better quality for our students. In conclusion, and I want to actually have some time to, answer a few questions. I thought there's a very interesting line that the chairman of the CEO of Cisco actually said. He said that education over the internet is going to be so big that it's going to make email look like a rounding error. and I think he's absolutely right. Now, as you saw, the entrenched interest groups here in the United States are going to fight it, as much as they can, because they know that if you save money because you don't need as many teachers, then that means there aren't as many dues going into the union treasury, which means there's less power for the union in the state capital, and et cetera, right? So that's their concern. Our concern should be, never losing sight of the fact that what is good for the kids, what is going to improve their performance in the classroom, because that's what all parents want. And we need to give them the choice to be able to choose that whichever delivery system best suits the needs of their kid. And virtual schooling, like scholarship programs, like tuition tax credits, and like all the other traditional school choice mechanisms that have been discussed over the past umpteen years by Milton Friedman and others, well, virtual and online education is just the newest addition to that bag of school choice. And we need to, make sure that its potential is fully utilized, and then also use these other things, whether it's scholarships or tuition tax credits, to make sure that that then gets into the hands of the parents. So with that, I also want one last point, though, and I'll close with this, is that one of the best things about a virtual school possibility is that in the funding for virtual schools, you can jigger it so that the schools are funded not simply on an appropriation basis like most schools are here. You can also include performance benchmarks in them. So in Florida, which when Matt Lager came and talked about the Florida model last year, in Florida we have funding for the Florida virtual school attached to the child, and it only actually goes to the school though if they meet certain performance benchmarks like successful completion of the course, etc. So it provides incentive for that school to actually ensure that the students perform, whereas currently in most states there's virtually no accountability and no incentive for schools to perform. And so you have the best of all worlds, potentially better performance, you have saving money, and you have accountability. I think that, and you have choice. So you bring that all together, and I think it's a model that we should consider for the future. Thank you very much. I know that Paul runs a tight ship, as I found out on our ride to Roswell, when he was going 100 miles an hour. Don't tell him I'll take a few questions. Yes?
I can see where working at a computer console would be, of course, perfect for things like mathematics, where you're doing creative problem solving. Does the virtual school model, is it as usable for things like history?
Yes, it is actually. This is, if you look at the companies, the software companies that have produced all these online courses, they have, successful courses, in the gamut: history, English, physics, biology, anything from the soft social sciences to the hard sciences, and and also things such as journalism, and especially these courses that may not be available in many rural schools. Here in New Mexico, we have a huge rural population, right? And college preparatory courses are often at a premium in these rural schools because you can't afford them, and you can't get the teachers to teach in some of these schools. So, you have a lot of kids who are denied the opportunity to have the broad gamut of college preparatory courses, AP courses, and yet, through a virtual and or online technology, all these courses are all of a sudden available to these students. It was interesting that I was on the Bob Clark show this morning. I know some of you have heard me on there. It was a great show. Bob Clark, what a wonderful guy. I'm talking about a guy whose voice was totally made for radio. But anyway, one of his callers, mentioned that his sister actually had to travel like 3 hours, from her high school to go to another school in order to get a certain class that she wanted. And, so it's, which, it boggles the mind that you have to travel 3 hours in order to simply to take a course, right? But how much easier would it be for that person to get their course online? And, not only easier, but think of the opportunity cost, the time wasted in traveling. That woman had evidently trouble passing this particular course. Well, maybe the reason was she was in her car or on a bus for 3 hours every day, And maybe if she spent that time studying, she would have passed the course. Well, that's what these online models give you, is that opportunity to make the most efficient use of your time, and also to take the courses that really do appeal to you. Yes? Yes?
Have you heard about the new stipulation for credit recovery, that you have to have face-to-face time as an athlete if you're doing credit recovery before leaving high school? Instead of a pre-recorded video that you do, you have to actually have face time with a real live teacher.
Yeah, and this whole issue of FaceTime is very interesting, because I think, again, it goes back to this, kind of misconception about what the current state of virtual education and online education is actually about. I mean, I think that a lot of lay people have this idea that online education is where somebody puts in a tape of, some guy in a lecture hall, talking about, physics 101. And that's what online education is, and that's what the person on the other end of the internet sees, right? That's not how it works. In the current use of software, you have direct interaction with the teacher. Only it's through online tools. For example, that autistic boy that we saw in our film. Now he communicates with his teachers through something called Illuminate, which is kind of a direct online chat type of device. And he's able to get immediate responses to his questions, much more so, I would say, than in a regular classroom. People seem to have this idea that simply by having a direct face-to-face, or actually having a physical person there, that you're going to have this, unbelievable interaction. And that's not the case. Like the other girl you saw in this video, Maria, who was a Russian immigrant, never spoke English when she first came over to the United States. Well, when she came here, of course not speaking English very well, she would raise her hand and ask lots of questions to her teacher. Her teacher then complained to her mother that your daughter actually asked too many questions, And so in an online situation, there are never too many questions. You can ask as many questions until, again, you master the material. That's the key. So, these false concepts, these false boundaries, that have been set up, really don't look, A, at the technology, but B, more importantly, what works. Cindy Katz, and then I'll go right here to this table.
How does the administration, is it a state-level funding issue, or is it goes down to the locals, and then the local schools who decides that they want to offer this, or is it a private funding?
It could be, different ways, Like, for example, in the Florida virtual school system, for example, originally what we had was the state would make an appropriation to the school, right? So you'd have a certain X amount of dollars going to the Florida virtual school, which is a state-sponsored virtual school. And the school could only enroll as many students as that money would allow, right? So it basically caps the number of students who can access that, that school. Well, what Florida did to change that and to open up the system was to actually attach that funding to the backs of the kid, so that as many kids who go to that school, and again, it's a virtual school, so it doesn't matter how many kids are in that school. You don't have to build more classrooms to house more kids. So, as many kids who decide to enroll in the Florida virtual school, then the school gets that money. And so that's why within after they changed that funding model, it went from I think about 14,000 kids to 31,000 kids, more than doubling, almost overnight. And so, and of course, however, if you have a voucher type system, a scholarship system, where kids can take that money to a public, private, charter, or virtual, whatever type of school they want, that money again is student-centered, attached to the student to go wherever they decide to choose. And I think that's an important part of this this case for virtual schools, that it can be made funding intelligent. Yes.
I will tell you, I'm a true believer, and especially in the fact that our children do not have cookie cutter shapes. But we have a challenge in New Mexico of our rural connectivity. What does your research show across the nation? I'm watching our online universities explode, and our community colleges are also exploding, but K-12 is lagging in virtual learning. So do you have any suggestions as to how we can
Yes.
get some back?
I think that's a very important point. I'm glad you brought that up, because she was talking about connectivity. And I assume you mean like, people in poor rural areas, right, who don't have access to the internet, right? How are they going to benefit by this type of education? And first of all, I will say that things are getting much better, around the country. People think about California, for example, as being this, very urban state, with San Francisco, San Diego, LA, Orange County. But if you look at, to the east of those coastal cities, it's all rural. And yet in our state, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of connectivity, in the availability of access to broadband internet. And so to the point where, I think it's like, I know Governor Schwarzenegger actually commissioned a task force to look at this question. And, I think the results were something like, 70 to 80% of homes with children have this type of access. Now, much higher than it was literally just a few years ago. Now, even for those, and this increase in the amount of connectivity, was occurring not just within affluent subgroups. It was occurring, amongst low-income and minority groups as well, which is important, because I know that here in New Mexico, you're a majority-minority state. In California, we're on our way to becoming that. And so unless you have that, type of access, then, this type of technology will be just, a good theory. I would say also, too, that even where you don't have that type of home connectivity to have, let's say, full-time virtual education in your home, there's still the opportunity to establish a school that has a blended learning model, right? You can have like that rocket ship charter school that I talked about here, a school that has, part of their day dedicated to an online education. The kids, I'm telling you that the kids who are attending that school, lots of them, I'm sure, because it's from a low-income, high immigrant population that they draw from, that a lot of those kids don't have internet at home, but they're able to benefit through the computer lab in that model. So there are ways to get around the lack of home access. Yes, and I think you want to stop at one.
We'll do one more.
One more question, yes.
Yeah, I just make a statement. My name is Dan Webb. I retired as a principal in California in Pasadena Unified School, John Muir High School.
Oh, okay.
Came here, I was principal of Los Lunas in Santa Fe High School. At Santa Fe, there's no connectivity problems. There are about 1,200 kids. 600 of them were enrolled in an online course. The criteria was you failed it with it's sort of a sad statistic, but if you failed it with a face-to-face teacher, a regular teacher, then you had to make up the class with online. Now again, that was nothing, but this was stupendous here compared to California. There was absolutely none of this when I left, when I retired. I was here for 3 years working in high schools, and so New Mexico really did a very nice job. Has been. The program they use isn't ideal. It's they use it, but it's E2020, Education 2020. It's widely used, particularly up and down the Rio Grande Valley.
And I think that's absolutely terrific. We could, California, has a lot to learn from a lot of other states, including New Mexico. And I'm hoping not just to talk about some of the things that could be improved upon here, but also things that I can take back to California as well to make sure that the folks who up till now have not listened very well, maybe we can force them to, and point to New Mexico as a way that we could look at reforming our public schools in the future. So I appreciate that bit of information. My wife April is here, in the audience. Our daughter actually lives in Pasadena, so we enjoy going down to Pasadena, escaping the heat of Sacramento and going down there to Pasadena. So thanks so much. With that, I want to thank all of you for your attention today. Hope you learned something, and if you have any questions that you want to ask me, I'll be around for a little while after this gathering, and you can come up and ask me. If we're on an online webinar, you could have asked me already. So thanks so much.
Thank you all for coming. We do have one brief thing to do before I let you all go. We have Noah Rodney here, and he is the young man right here in the front who won a school choice essay contest on why school choice is important. And that was actually carried out by a group called Americans for Prosperity, which if you're from the left side of the spectrum, you know them as the Koch Evil Empire Organization, which reminds me that my wife Krista, thank you very much for doing all of the checking in of people. And APS is actually having a big shindig around here at this hotel, and apparently we got some looks for our Rio Grande Foundation signage. But on the good side of that, we got to sit Lance down with 2 APS board members there on the school board. And so we're going to do this presentation real quick with Noah. So why don't you come down here, and Hannah, could you come up as well?
Signage is here.
Yeah, signage here.
Perfect.
No Vanna White.
Perfect fit. All right. Congratulations. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll lift it up here. Sorry.
So with that, thank you all for coming out. Lance is happy to answer questions. I know he's got to meet with Hannah and a few other folks after the event, but if you want to ask him a question you didn't get to ask in the Q&A, go ahead and talk to him after the event. Thank you all again for coming to our latest Milton Friedman Day event.